I'd like to reflect on how difficult it can be to understand parts of the Bible. I read quite a lot of other books. I always have. They're mostly non-fiction, history, geography, biology, biography. I can't resist second-hand bookshops, especially if they offer me books at £2 or £3 each. Some years ago, I had to make a pact with my wife. I call it the law of constant shelving. No more bookcases. We already had 4 huge IKEA bookcases, and each of them had 6 shelves. I often give up a book halfway through, or maybe sooner. Getting tedious. It's repeating itself. It's made its point long ago, and now it's just playing variations on the theme. But it's unusual for me to give it up because I don't understand it. By and large, I do understand what I'm reading. Or at least I think I do. It's different with the Bible. There's lots I don't understand. And sometimes I get impatient with it. Like just the other day, I wasn't getting impatient with myself, I was getting impatient with the Bible. I was arrogant enough to assume that what I was reading was at fault. Of course, it couldn't be my fault, but I couldn't understand it. I could show you what I was reading. I could show you how I did eventually come to understand it, but that's not the point. It's enough to say that it was a verse in the book of Acts. Luke recorded what Paul was saying, and Paul was quoting Isaiah to prove that Jesus rose from the dead. Didn't make sense. I found myself getting annoyed with Paul, then with Isaiah, and then with Luke, and finally with the translators. That was not good. I'd forgotten a much simpler lesson. It's a lesson Jesus taught his disciples. It's the lesson that we're not expected to understand some of the stuff without the Lord's help. You know the parable of the sower, and you know what it means. But how do we know what it means? With the benefit of hindsight, it's blindingly obvious to us what Jesus meant when he told the parable of the sower. But it wasn't at all obvious to his 12 disciples. They had to ask Jesus what it meant. He explained it to them, and that's the explanation we rely on. Later in Matthew chapter 13, we find the disciples asking Jesus to explain the parable of the weeds in the field. He did just that. Matthew recorded it, and that's how we know what it means. And there were more parables. Listen to what Mark has to say. With many similar parables, Jesus spoke the word to them as much as they could understand. He didn't say anything to them without using a parable, but when he was alone with his own disciples, he explained everything. The Lord explained what they couldn't understand. They had to go to him for the explanations. They had to depend on him. He explained everything that they needed to know. I often use a simple little prayer before I pick up my Bible. I guess I forgot to use this prayer when I got cross with Paul and with Isaiah and with Luke. It goes like this. Lord, please help me to understand what you want me to understand. Frankly, there's no need for us to understand everything that's in the Bible, and it's arrogant to think that we have a right to understand it all. But the Lord does want us to understand enough of it for our own good. So let's make that the closing prayer of this reflection for all of us. Lord, please help us to understand what you want us to understand. please. Amen.